Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Big Blend Radio's Authors Wednesday show with Books Forward. We are excited to introduce and welcome author, writer, and poet Stephanie Dickinson. She's joining us to talk about her latest work, and it's a true crime story, but it's also a memoir, and it is called Razor Wild Wilderness, and it's out now. You can go right to her website for full details, and I'm going to say go check out her library of her other books that she's written. She's written. I know. I'm like, serious. This is a serious writer here. Go to stephaniedickinson.net and you'll learn more. But welcome, Stephanie. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. And how are you?
Oh, doing good. Doing good. Today we're in Albany, Oregon. When this airs, it's probably your book will be out everywhere, right?
Right.
And I don't know where we'll be I think we'll be in Arizona or California, but you're in like the heart of New York City, right?
I'm in the East Village, in the heart of Lower Manhattan. Yes, I am. And,
wow. And so you got there, but you grew up in Iowa, on a farm in Iowa.
It's a long journey to get here, but I grew up on a farm in Iowa, raised by a single parent, and traveled around the country myself. Not as much as you are, but I've traveled.
Iowa was neat. We had a good time. We ended up we went through some parks up. We did travel near where you were, but then we ended just kind of crossing over to go to Kansas City. Where were we coming from? I can't remember, but we were going up, and we also ended up spending time in a little Danish village, and it was really beautiful. So, but when you say farm country, I now know when they say like the farm country, rural Iowa, like you could drive for miles and you just see all these barns and horses, and so it's a really different experience, and it's beautiful. So a beautiful area, but it's like that's got to be night and day New York City, you know.
You trade the beauty of the landscape. I didn't realize how gorgeous Iowa was growing up until I left Iowa. It took me many years to realize. I think a lot of us are like that. It takes a while for us to realize the paradise we were raised in. Lower Manhattan is gritty and it's dirty, but it's also a pretty exciting place. And there's so many artists here, so many writers, and so many people of every kind of diversity that makes it a real exciting place.
So that's got to be good people watching for all your books, right? All your writing and poetry.
Good people watching for everything. It takes a lot of different people to make the world comes to New York City. You don't really have to go anywhere to appreciate other cultures, other languages. It's very nice.
Razor Wire Wilderness, the title, like even the title is like, dude, what's that about?
Scary.
And I just was like, we have to interview you on this. We've done a lot of shows of women in prison. We've done shows on just what happens to women, how they can get and young girls get caught up into a cycle of becoming a sex worker and being pimped out from when they were really young girls, and it happens to Black women, white women. I think a lot of times it really does, just the cycle that happens afterwards is really quite traumatic, and I don't think our society recognizes what's happening, and it's also a form of human trafficking, and it's happening in everyone's backyards, so I really appreciate that you wrote this book, and its memoir. It also delves into your life. But where did this whole story, how did you find out? And tell us give me an overview before I overdo it.
No, I became interested in this story when I saw Krystal Riordan's picture on the cover of the Daily News in 2006, after the Jennifer Moore murder had tragically taken place 2 days before. Krystal was arrested with her boyfriend and also pimp, Draymond Coleman, who had strangled and raped Jennifer in a very shabby Weehawken hotel room. And Krystal had been in the room when this happened.
Wow.
And so this part of the story just captivated me. I don't know if that's the correct word, but I just could not understand how those two girls could have been in the same room and the outcome being death. And I had been shot when I was 18 years old, which is part of razor wire wilderness. And so I was extremely interested in women who make these choices. Like Krystal was 20 at the time, but Jennifer was 18 when she lost her life. An impulsive choice. You know, Jennifer had been drinking at a club with a friend, and their car had been towed while they were inside. And the tow pound would not release the car to two drunk girls. So Jennifer's friend passed out. She was so angry, she had a seizure and passed out. She was put in an ambulance and taken to the hospital. And Jennifer was by herself. And she was afraid of being arrested because she was underage drinking. She was going to college in a few months. And she walked off the tow pound on West Side Highway, which, if you know New York City, that's a very dangerous place to be at 3:30, 4 a.m. And Draymond, and her purse was locked in the car. So she had her cell phone with her. That's all she had, and a little white skirt and a little black top. And Draymond had started following her and somehow convinced her to get into a taxi cab with him. And he took her to Weehawken, where he shared a rent by the week room with Krystal. She was a prostitute at the time, and his sole means of support. Draymond had no other prostitutes. He convinced Jennifer to go into the room. She didn't want to go, but he convinced her that they had a charger for her cell phone up there. And so, and then she probably saw Krystal and thought, well, it will be okay to go into this person's room, this man's room, because there's another girl here. And she did go into the room, and the assault started. She did not comply with Draymond's, desire to have sex with her. She fought, scratched him tremendously, and then he started to beat her. And during the course of this, Krystal left the room and went into the bathroom and stayed there for a long time because she couldn't witness the violence of it. She went back into the room, and he was strangling her. And he said to Krystal, "I'm doing this to quiet her. She won't settle down." And he said, "I'm doing this because I love you," to Krystal. And so this mix-up of Krystal may have been jealous of Jennifer, but this manipulation of Krystal saying, "I'm doing this because I love you," to a really vulnerable and confused person was another key to this whole story, which is quite a story. But that is what caused, and the story doesn't stop here, unfortunately. After Jennifer is dead, Draymond tries to have sex with her. And Jennifer and Krystal said this is the most horrific thing that she ever witnessed in her life, ever. So she carries that with her.
Wow.
But the next day, it was
messed up.
Yeah, so they eventually cleaned the body and carried it out in a huge suitcase and left it in a dumpster in New Jersey. And so it's a dirty, horrific story.
Yeah.
And I couldn't reconcile the picture I saw of Krystal on the cover of the paper with those facts.
Wow. Wow. So did you think it would turn into a book and a memoir, or did you just start like contacting her and then going from there?
I didn't contact her for years. The murder happened in 2006, but I wrote a fictional novel called Love Highway. And as I was finishing it, one of my friends said, "Well, why don't you contact Krystal? the person this character is based on. And
Oh, wow.
I thought, and then I did. I wrote to her. I called the prison and I got her ID number, and I wrote to her, and she wrote right back. I had no idea this was going to turn into a story about Krystal and then Lucy and a lifetime commitment to someone, that I have feelings for as a human being, but I also many questions still to this day too. So, but to go to your question, I was very surprised by how sex work figured into this whole picture, and how girls that are so vulnerable, we are all so impressionable to some degree or other at those young ages.
Yeah.
I know I certainly was. But that is like a component of a certain kind of control that is used over these girls, and to a lesser or greater degree. And so that control that Draymond had over Krystal, she worked for him, played into how she was passive in that room when her future depended on her not being that, and Jennifer's did too.
Wow. Scary stuff.
Yeah. When you think, just that whole, how it can build and get built, those kind of situations build, like the crimes get deeper and deeper and deeper. But this is like the crime got deeper, but it also got sicker, with what he was doing. But Krystal ending up in prison, wasn't she got like what, 30 years and he got 50 years? For her to end up in prison, what happened? I mean, in a way, you would think that she would have maybe served a really way lesser time and had some help. You would think we would have some kind of rehabilitation kind of help.
Do you know, this is what so many people that are acquainted with this story, including my partner, they ask, how is it that she got 30 years? You remember the Patty Hearst case
Oh, yeah.
where it was that the Stockholm syndrome was evoked, where you're in control of people, criminals, and that you become thinking like those people, that you become you become part of the kind of a robot for these, and that should have been evoked for Krystal. She had a public defender. Her bail was set at $1 million. It truly was. Her adoptive parents stood by her, but I think they thought, we can't put any more money into the defense on this would be just astronomical. But I think the public defender did a good job. But she had profoundly bad advice coming from Draymond. She stood by him. She's always said loyalty is her great virtue. And she stood by Draymond, and whatever he pled guilty. And so she pled guilty to kidnapping and accessory after the fact, helping clean the body and dispose of it. Once they were arrested, she gave every bit of information to the police, and she led them to Jennifer's body. So you see how that control shifted then to the police, and how her obeying sort of then immediately shifted. It's whoever was in sort of control of the situation is the one that she quote unquote obeyed. And she really did need therapy for that, what she calls her weak-mindedness. But she pled guilty, and the victim's impact statement was given by Candida Moore, Jennifer's mother, and is one of the best victim impact statements I've ever seen. It is very long, and it goes through, the Krystal leaving the room, that she left the room during the assault, and just these factors. And I think the judge was so moved by that statement that he gave her the maximum. And he said, there's only one victim in this courtroom, and that is Jennifer Moore. You will someday see the sunlight again in your 50s, but she never will.
Yeah.
But Krystal will get out in her 40s. So she's under the 85% rule, which is you serve flat out 85% of your sentence. You can't get paroled earlier, but you will serve 85% of your sentence. So she has about 6 more years, 5 or
Wow.
6 more years to go. Yeah.
Hmm.
But
So
that is a long sentence.
I mean, you
It is
think
a
about
long
as
sentence.
when you're so young too, and she was probably paralyzed by just
Fear.
fear, when something like that. And then he's obviously a loose cannon, so it's kind of it's a scary
Hmm.
thing. And young girls get trapped into this. And, we can't look down on them. I, I, I was a
Hmm.
perfect angel, right, Nancy?
Hello.
I don't know if I believe that. I don't
I was
know.
a perfect, I mean, I got,
No, but you
I,
do you get into scary situations when you're young, even though your parents tell you don't do this, don't do that.
Mhm.
The draw being with your friends and they're all going to do one thing and nobody thinks it's dangerous and you think it's going to be fine. And sometimes your friends just leave you, go do something else. And if you get attached to one person and you trust them, I mean, I would find it hard to trust somebody who's strangling someone. I think once she left the room, if I was her, I'd probably run for it. Unless she was incredibly in love with him, which
it's blinding.
She
yeah,
was.
yeah, that I mean, but when you see him strangle somebody, that's gotta, I don't know, that could be a red flag, you think?
Yes.
I would have thought she would have run if unless there was a reason that she couldn't run.
It's hard to
Yeah,
tell. It's hard to tell in those situations. And she's already,
yeah,
doing sex work. So
he compromised
she's
already.
already in a different place. And so what is she like
Hmm.
now? I mean, you've managed to visit her, right? And go
Yeah.
in.
In the past, now of course visits are prohibited
Sure.
because of COVID, and we email a lot,
Oh,
Hmm.
nice.
and and I've been there helping her, with a lot of things, with books, with art supplies, with you live on commissary when you're in prison, and so you're always needing cash, and I think that, and she is a very she has a lot of friends in prison, and she's very helpful to people. She shares a lot,
Mm.
and when she became very good friends with Lucy Weems, and the other character in my book,
Hmm.
and Lucy is now out of prison. She only served 7 of 9 years for robbing her drug dealer, but I
Wow.
became very friendly with Lucy too, and Lucy has only wonderful things to say about the generosity of Krystal and her kindness. In fact, too much so, and so that might go into that control
Hmm.
business. Now Lucy was shared. They became very good friends because Lucy's mother left the family when Lucy was 4 years old. She was a drug addict, and she took up with another man. She then kidnapped her 2 children, and Lucy and her brother basically went hungry and unfed and unwashed for a year until their father was able to get them back.
Wow.
And it was a large Italian family, and she said they were healed by just a lot of love, some really wonderful relatives. But one of her uncles seduced her when she was 14 years old
Uh,
and said, "Do you want this pair of shoes that Lucy wanted? And if you want that pair of shoes, then we can do this.
Hmm.
And the money is there for you." And number one, she loved her uncle, and number two, the money. And so this went on for years. This
Wow.
relationship between the uncle and Lucy. And when she was 18 years old, he introduced her to a madam who had a house in
oh my
Connecticut.
gosh.
And so this is in the book too. This incredible detail about this house where you could only go for 2 weeks. There were certain rules about brushing teeth, taking baths between men, and it was very, very high end, and take out everything. I mean, the detail is incredible, but what the underlying story is constant trafficking and exploitation, but often by someone in your immediate family, which makes it even worse, I think. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So they meet, Lucy meets Krystal in prison, and they become friends.
Yes, they become really good friends, and Lucy's out now, but they're still very good friends. And so, and I really, really respect Lucy. She's done quite well since she's been out. She's moved to Pennsylvania. She married the father of one of her daughters, and she's working, and she has a degree in accounting. So she was derailed by heroin. So she's a very smart and she's someone you might want to interview. Some very articulate, and so I really respect her opinion about things, and she's giving me a lot of insight about Krystal too.
Oh, that's awesome.
Do you think that the prison environment helped them at all? Or, I mean, because some people think you go to prison to be rehabilitated, and other people kind of feel, well, you go to prison so the rest of us don't have to put up with whatever you think you want to do, So, I don't know, maybe it's different from prison to prison, from state to state. But do you get a sense that the prison actually helped rehabilitate these girls?
I don't know. I think the separation for Lucy from her children and withdrawing from heroin just woke her up so profoundly. And her eldest daughter is a teenager now and has told her, Mommy, if you do this again, that's it. I mean, she can see how profoundly hurt her daughter has been by her mother's incarceration and not having her mother during those years. So she has problems from that. So I think Lucy's that prison gave her that time to reflect, and in a horrible way. It's pretty gruesome in there as far as the money that you have to spend on. You have to buy your own toilet paper, your own hygiene equipment, products, and so it is a privatization. Prisons are privatized, as you know, and so it degrades some of the rehabilitation aspects. But I think Krystal, it is also in the book about, she spent 4 years at Elan, the school for troubled teens in Maine. It's been shut down now, but it was an attack therapy school. I don't know if you've heard it, but her adoptive parents really couldn't handle Krystal as she reached adolescence. I think she was very troubled by, how her birth parents had neglected her, and she'd been molested as a child. So she was acting out as an adolescent. She was sent to the school, which is notorious now for the treatment of young men and women. You were attacked for forever. There were rules and attack therapy, and so she's always said, Krystal has always said, I'd rather be in prison than at Elan. So so I think that there is some wiggle room in prison, at least at the Edna Mann Correctional Facility for women, for some kind of semblance of treatment. But it looks like they're going to be closing the prison down because of, I don't know if you've heard or not, but there's been sexual abuse scandals that have just exploded in the past year. I think, about 20 people have been indicted for sexual abuse of prisoners. And about 3 months ago, there was a sort of a riot in the segregated unit, and there was a lot of violence between the correction officers and the inmates. So things are moving towards a real revamping of the women's prison in New Jersey after these scandals. So
it's like the show Orange is the New Black.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah,
but that was based on a true story too. I mean, that really was.
Yes, it was.
you know, but you think about what happens and the privatization of prisons. I mean, it's a really weird, these corporate entities. I think that's something, you know, across the board that has to be looked at in a deeper way. Because a lot of times people are in there that don't belong in there. Some people are. And then there's, just like you're saying, you know, there's a lot of money being made by the wrong people in regards to privatized prisons, I think. And
Yeah,
it's
it
something,
seems, you know, if the prisons are making money off of the number of inmates and how long they're in, I mean, it's a really bad business model. It's not, there's nothing there that says rehabilitation. It's called, let me keep you in here as long as possible so I can make more money. I mean,
and then, yeah, laws being like you get pulled over for smoking a joint. Well, you should get pulled over for that, or drinking and driving, but you know what I mean? You don't need to go to prison for 25 years over a joint,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
So that's, I always wonder if we have those laws just so that we can put people in prison for profit. So,
You know, it's really something that needs to be looked at, because, you know, the correctional facility that Krystal's in was started by Edna Mann, who was one of the premier women's corrections officers of the last century, and she was the one who implemented the rehabilitation model. She was the one who integrated Black prisoners and white prisoners and had daycare for the children of prisoners, and all these sorts of things of, you know, like daycares. They've been degraded, but that was the impetus behind, you know, the women's prison. Now Krystal tells me, and I'm not sure that this is the truth, or I'm not sure if she knows, because they're not given correct information always, that they're going to be shutting the prison down and sending the women to various men's prisons. Yikes. So I don't know what if that's a rumor or exactly what's going to happen. I think they've got some kind of stay now, some months, but this was the latest thing that I heard. So, but the thing I think of the years that I've corresponded with Lucy and Krystal, the worst deficit in funding, maybe you travel across the United States, you have probably heard this. The medical facilities are extremely degraded, and you're just not seen by personnel, you know, with your complaints. They just don't believe you. You know, they don't believe the truth of an inmate speaking, and women have had hemorrhages. They've had women that have died because they've not been seen, and have begged you fill out forms, and they're ignored. You know, Lucy had a tumorous lump under one of her arms, and she had a hysterectomy as well when she was in prison. But to see initially, and she was hemorrhaging, see the initial doctors, her fathers had to call. It went on for a month practically before she was seen. So this is a real problem. You know, Krystal tells me that so many of her friends that have been released die shortly after release. And this is anecdotal, but there's something to this, because she's had me look up obituaries of her friends that have recently left prison, and the medical care is so bad that people are carrying cancers, or they're developing without any treatment, and when they are released, then it's too late. So Lucy told me that they had a veterinarian practicing as the doctor in the medical unit for years.
No way.
Taking out right.
No, come on.
So I mean, as they say, you can't make this stuff up. It is so bad. It's funny, and it's just. And
that's disgusting.
Yeah.
But, I mean, nothing against veterinarians, but that's inhuman. That's really inhuman. And that isn't there some kind of agency that checks the prisons?
There are. And
they need to get better at their job.
You know, Lucy and Krystal were taking care of a severely disabled prisoner who had MS, but she was immobile. She could only basically use one arm. And prisoners are not supposed to touch other prisoners. This is the law, and Lucy happened to know that. But they were bathing her, they were bathrooming her, they were
Wow.
catheters, all of this, all these, they didn't want to hire someone, so they were using prisoners. And this kind of stuff is against the law, but it just goes on. So people just, I think, as much as prisoners' rights are becoming much more, people care a lot more about what's going on, and it's still there's still that notion you're there because you did wrong, and so we're not going to treat you like a human being, basically.
There's a, when you think about people and crimes, there are people that are born just cold-blooded killers. You know what I mean? Psychopaths, there's that side of it. There's the rapists where they say they really never really rehabilitate. There's that.
Yeah.
Until maybe someone finds a way of doing it. There's like a 90-something% thing about that. When you think about Krystal and Lucy, they started in a rough, they were in a rough patch as girls.
Yeah, they're too
How
young.
do you expect them not to end up in some kind of trouble? And so a lot of times I think that people look down at, women that have, as young girls, if they're sex workers, you don't know how or why. And then if they go to prison, it's automatically, oh, they're in prison locked up. Let's just forget about them. And we've got the crud off the streets, basically, clean up the streets, lock them away. And that's that. But we're not fixing the problem. And so the cycle will continue. And that's, what I think this country's, we're looking at homelessness across this country that is just insane.
Yeah.
Insane. The homelessness, the situation, I know LA is bad, a lot of any place that's warmer, but we've seen homeless, set up in the snow in the Midwest, and
There's
yes,
a lot right now.
there's a lot of people helping, but it's about how did they end up homeless? What was going on in their family unit? What is the root problem? And that is what I think our country has just kept sweeping under the rug, but it really does affect all of us at the end of the day. We are all connected. I mean, this country it should be looked at as a community. I'm not saying I'm a socialist. I'm just saying we're all connected. Wherever we live, we should be seeing what can we do. Why is someone in a situation like this? It is going to end up with some kind of crime because that's just that cycle. Someone has to help, and we as a society, I believe, we've got to get better at what we're doing about taking care of each other.
Well,
You're
especially
absolutely
parents.
right.
If your parents aren't there for you, it's almost a given you're going to end up on the streets. And once you're on the streets, it's really, really hard to get back into a normal life, and it's really hard to get help. So, I mean, I think parenting is, maybe we're not strong enough in parenting roles, and some women are becoming parents at such young ages. And we don't seem to have that strong family unit like we used to in several generations back, where you had grandparents to fall back on and aunts and such. Now I think we're too spread out. So if you're a young girl and you're in New York and your mom is in California, who's really watching out for you? I think it's really difficult today because there's almost too much freedom.
I think that's really, really important. I was raised by a single family mother, but there was a grandmother, there were aunts and uncles, and that made such a difference. And you think back to the good old days. There was so much wrong. There was so much, misogyny and racial prejudice, and so everything sort of, but there was this component of a larger family, which is tremendously helpful, and I think that this homelessness, I mean, this has just grown to this enormity that just hearing you two talk about it, and it's not just a housing thing, but it partially is a housing thing. People are spending.
I always say this on shows, the federal government owns most of the real estate in this country and most of the vacant buildings. So if you got vacant buildings and you've got homeless people, You might want to try putting them inside and rehabilitating them so they can go back and get jobs. Instead, here we've got homeless and we have vacant buildings, and here's the government as the majority of the vacant building owner. Okay,
I
yeah.
think that makes a lot of sense. It probably has something to do with the private real estate market and all of that. But in New York City, for instance, if I lost this rent stabilized walk up that I live in, I don't know what we would do. I mean, it is so prohibitive money wise, and this is true in so many parts of the country that and it's funny that we don't speak about this nearly as much as we should on the political level. So
I agree, and it's something that we can do things locally. Sometimes that's the first step, because you know what's going on in your community, and from there you can start going federal with getting federal bills and everything. But states do what they want, government, local governments do what they want. But if we start locally, I think that's something you can do. Everyone could do something. We use our voices as best we can. Everyone could do something, but it is about getting back to that family unit and having the right family. Of like Lucy's situation, the dirty old uncle on the side,
Yeah.
can be a death thing too. And so there's got to be a communication with families, so that when that happens to a girl or a boy, I know friends who've had both sides, and then they'll run out and be homeless, and then you get picked up. They're like, oh, I already know how to do this. At least I'm kind of in more control. You know what I mean? It's a weird cycle. But if families had this education about this can happen, even if you think Uncle Joe's the sweetest guy on the planet, but he's really not. Look at the Catholic Church. What happened? And there's other churches. I'm not just picking on Catholics. I'm saying, look what I'm not picking on you. I'm just saying, look at what happened. Oh, you're supposed to trust the person that you go give your confession to, but hello.
Yeah.
So these you can't just think, oh, the mayor's the sweetest guy. Look at all the politicians going off and doing disgusting things. So that's a whole other, that's a show in itself.
That's
but
something else, man.
We've got to have an education where families, the parents and the children have an open dialogue of understanding. So when something happens, that and that children understand not to use that too, because that also becomes a little tool for lies and misgivings, but there's something has to happen for the family units to be more connected in that way.
It's really interesting. My Uncle Bud, funny Uncle Bud, as everybody called funny. I had two Uncle Buds. One was normal and the other one was funny Uncle Bud. And every holiday he'd be, come sit on my knee. And my father would go ballistic and don't you dare sit on his lap. Don't you dare sit. No, you stay away from him. But my dad would be in the same room with funny Uncle Bud, have a drink and talk to him. I'm like, well, how is it that Uncle Bud was welcome to family holidays? If everybody knew, all the adults knew, funny Uncle Bud was funny. I don't get it.
That's really a disconnect.
Isn't that weird?
There, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's the
weird.
unspokenness of that time too,
For you writing this, Razor Wire Wilderness, and the connection between with Lucy and Krystal, and even getting into this sea of what prison life is like, especially for women, going through all these stories, which dirty, gritty. When you hear them and even this conversation, it's hard on the psyche just to know that this is happening. It's painful.
Yeah.
How did you keep going? How did you not be like, how did you smile the next day, or what I mean? How did you keep your heart from just wanting to call everybody and say, what the hell, fix this? How do you keep going?
I don't know. I think that my own past and what I've experienced in my life is sort of made me able to handle a lot of grittiness, but also a sense of humor. I think we all have to have a sense of humor.
Oh, yeah.
In the darkest of places and moments, and some of the goings on were funny, and I guess it was those, and there were some wonderful things that the prisoners did for each other. I think this was an anecdote from the book that Lucy was missing her daughters so much, and she couldn't sleep. She was crying, and Krystal at that point was her bunkie. They shared the same room, and Krystal put a sheet on the floor, what they call, and Lucy got on it, and she swaddled her in this sheet, and then she dragged her around the floor just to make her laugh, and then put her back to bed. And I was so moved by that, this act of compassion and love between friends, that those were the kind of moments that made me think that sometimes we misjudge the quality of other people's, personhood. Because I thought that was such a moving thing. And also I was very surprised in writing this book at how passionate friendships were in prison, whether they were, heterosexual basis or not. That because there weren't as many distractions, that other people were paramount, and gestures and things that we so much miss out when we're involved in our world of just rush. So I was very impressed by that. Sometimes it would lead to jealousy and violence, but there was just an awful lot of really beautiful moments that I wrote about in this book.
Awesome.
Maybe when a young person is thrown into prison, no matter what they've done, maybe their age should play more of be more important to the prosecutors and the juries and the system than it is right now. Because what somebody does when they're still basically teenager or slightly above older than a teenager, they're not mature. And if you're out on the street, you're going to get in trouble, and whether you choose to be on the street or not, if you're out on the street, things are going to happen. And I think you're way too young to handle it and handle things in the right way. And then you end up in prison for 40 years. I mean, it seems really unfair from the aspect of, obviously, if you're out on the street at a very young age, somebody's already let you down badly. And then you get punished for it. Maybe the parents should be the ones who go to prison.
Well, I'm not sure we shouldn't have a little class for people wanting to be parents.
Yeah,
I'm not a
you
parent,
think?
but my brother always said it's very easy to make children, but extremely difficult to raise children.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing.
Yeah, it is. It is. I think
really
it's.
Is.
Yeah, and I think your body, when you think about physiology and how our bodies work, your bodies are already like, ooh, as teenagers, we can do this and it's naughty. And then boom. So your bodies, what your bodies are doing compared to your brain is like two different things. So, then
alrighty then.
You've got kids and you're like, wait, I just got out of school. How did that happen? Or I'm still in school. And now what? So, it is the way the world works, but I really appreciate you writing about Krystal's story and Lucy, and sharing yours as well. Everyone, again, Razor Wire Wilderness. It is by Stephanie Dickinson. There's the book. Go get it. And you can go to her website, stephaniedickinson.net. Are you on social media for people to connect and keep up with you?
I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and
right on.
There.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. And I wish you so well in your journey, doing the good work that you're doing.
Thank you. When we get to New York, we'll call you because we're scared of New York.
Yeah. No, don't be scared of New York. And the outside restaurants are all open. And it's really wonderful to see all the things coming back. Awesome. And it's going to be kind of an outdoor thing. It's so nice meeting you. Thank you so much.